So we have all these little bits of scrap paper, so to speak.
The workman Mena gave the pot of fresh fat to the chief of police, Metmosa, who said, "I shall pay for it in barley."
I will get you in the mountains and kill you.
If there's beer on offer, you don't come looking for me. But if there's work, you do come looking for me.
These people are essentially like us. They do things we do now. We recognize these people as though they were brothers and sisters.
But these villagers were very different from other Egyptians in one fundamental way. A limestone chipping discovered in the village shows that when a pharaoh died, they didn't mourn, they celebrated.
The reaction is really quite unusual, and it says in one of the documents that the vizier comes to tell them that the king has died, and it says they rejoiced exceedingly, which means the king has died, we can start building the tomb of a new king.
After Seti's death, disemboweling and mummifying his body would have taken 70 days. But work on his tomb would have started 15 years before, when he first came to the throne. For the royal architects, the very first decision in the building of Seti's tomb had been crucial, choosing where to place the tomb entrance. This was a decision fraught with uncertainty, since the architects were working blind.
When it came time to dig one tomb, they could not be sure that there wasn't already another tomb in the immediate area. In fact, we have 5 instances in the valley where engineers digging one tomb either ran into an earlier tomb or detected that fact far too late, had to make a sudden right turn and move off in another direction in order to avoid running into it.
This risk of collision may explain why the layout of the royal tombs changed over the centuries. The earliest tombs had L-shaped plans, but after a few generations, this design was discarded. Tombs were laid out in straight lines instead. In an overcrowded valley, straight tombs took up much less real estate. For the men who actually built the tombs, each week started with tools being handed out. Scribes kept careful records of any copper tools issued. In ancient Egypt, copper was so valuable that each chisel was worth well over a month's pay.
They kept careful tabs on who had what copper. And at the beginning of the week, the chisels were weighed. And then at the end of the week, the chisels were weighed to make sure that they weren't shaving off any of the copper to sell it.
With only such basic tools to hand, tomb building relied on sheer muscle power. For the men at the rock face, conditions were tough.
Imagine dust choking the air, the humidity at 95%, the temperature as high as you could almost possibly bear, stones falling about you, and of course a foreman who, by God, is going to get a full day's work out of you or know the reason why.
Toiling under the glare of the Egyptian sun was punishing enough, but the men would find it even harder to work where there was no sunlight at all.
There is no light once you get into the mountain, so you've got to provide light of some sort. And what they had were oil lamps. You had a bowl with oil, a linen wick, and you would put some salt in it so as to avoid having smoke.
The further the quarrymen dug into the mountainside, the harder it got to keep their bearings.
Well, excavating a tomb is very much like digging a mine. It's very difficult to maintain your orientation. You might tend to veer to the left or veer to the right. It's hard to maintain a horizontal direction. The Egyptians had surveying equipment, but it was extremely simple. They had a carpenter's square, they had a plumb bob, they had a piece of string to measure length, and basically that was about it.
With only such simple equipment to hand, the accuracy they achieved was extraordinary. One surviving tomb plan shows just how precise the quarrying of chambers could be.
What the specifications said they should achieve was in fact achieved within about 2 millimeters accuracy.
As excavation of the pharaoh's tomb progressed, the workmen were constantly on the lookout for any telltale changes in the type of rock being excavated. Many of them would have learned from bitter experience how unpredictable the valley's geology could be.
One of the difficulties of quarrying a tomb is you're not sure what lies ahead. You start off in rock which looks perfect for the job in hand, and then within a few meters you hit disaster.
Only the top layer of rock in the valley, limestone, is suitable for tomb building. Every quarryman's worst nightmare was hitting the soft and crumbly layer of shale below. If they dug down too far, all work on a tomb might have to be abandoned. Decades of work could go to waste. But Seti's tomb was quarried successfully. Like every other major tomb in the valley, it had 4 key features: a corridor leading into the rock, a deep pit for protection, storerooms to house the royal treasure, and the most important room of all, the pharaoh's burial chamber. But a pharaoh's tomb was still far from ready when the quarrying was complete. Just as important were the paintings covering the tomb walls.
In ancient Egypt, there is no art for art's sake. So the men working in the Valley of the Kings are not just producing pretty pictures, they are producing the means by which the king will come alive again.
The texts and scenes on the tomb walls were magical spells to help the dead king find his way to the afterlife. Entrusted with creating these images were some of the greatest craftsmen in the ancient world. Their work on a tomb could span many years. But after Seti's death, these craftsmen had their work cut out. They had just 70 days to finish the tomb before the state burial.
Once the 70 days have gone, that's it. The funeral takes place, the tomb has to be closed forever.
Well, the first draftsman basically made a rough design of what was to be included, indicating the hieroglyphs, the drawings, and their position. Later on, his superior would come along and in black ink would correct those figures, giving them more accurate proportions, appropriate size, ensuring that the layout was aesthetically pleasing. He might also check for spelling errors or omissions. In this case, for example, apparently the first scribe working in red ink inadvertently left out a column of text. The later scribe had to come in, move this figure to the right, and add then the hieroglyphs that the earlier scribe had omitted. This was important for several reasons, not just for its aesthetic appearance, but because these, after all, are the texts designed to ensure that Pharaoh travels safely from this life to the next one. A spelling error, and my God, you might give him the wrong destination. Who knows where he'd wind up?
Hundreds of feet underground with no natural light, painting the walls was no easy matter.
You can picture these men with a brush in one hand, the oil lamp in the other, carefully squinting as they tried to apply the paint. Must have been a very difficult thing to do. But the quality of the workmanship is wonderful. The way in which each detail of this broad collar necklace is shown, the details in the face, the subtle modeling of the lips here, and wonderful detail in the ear and the nose. These are time-consuming operations, even if you're a highly experienced craftsman.